Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Grant Wall. I've been covering soccer as a journalist for 24 years now. We've got a great panel here today for glass ceilings, Black and Latinx communities, and women in U.S. soccer. Let me introduce our folks here. Crystal Dunn from the U.S. Women's National Team, and as of today, the Portland Thorns. She's also part of the Black Women's Players Collective. We've got Dr. Brenda Elsey, the co-author with Dr. Jermaine Scott of the Fair Network Report, the representation of Black and Latinx communities and women in U.S. soccer. We've got Justin Morrow, who's with Toronto FC. He's the executive director of Black Players for Change. And Evan Whitfield, former MLS player and co-founder of SCORE, which stands for Soccer Collective on Racial Equity. He was recently appointed a visiting scholar at Harvard conducting soccer anti-racism research. Thanks everyone for being on this panel. Thank you to the Fair Network for organizing this conference and this panel. And let's just dive in here. I want to start with Dr. Elsey, the co-author of this FAIR report. And we'll get to your report's recommendations a bit later here, but just to start, what did your recent report for the FAIR Network find connected to this topic?
So when we went into the report, we were really inspired by the Black Lives Matters activism. So I should say the people on this panel in many ways generated FAIR, us kind of thinking and reflecting, what can we do to be helpful and supportive? And we've done these reports in Europe for many years. And so we said, hey, let's try to do this. And Evan also was very helpful in giving us a little push. And what we found from the numerical data is a startling lack of racial diversity in executives, assistant and head coaches, front office personnel across the board that was not commensurate with the diversity, like the rich diversity of players. So there was clearly a disconnect between what we saw on the playing field and then what was happening, after and behind the scenes and organizing. And then, we also found that those who did succeed had a bar that was astronomically high. So Thierry Henry, one of the best players of all time, is not to take away from his, amazing accomplishments, but to say if that's the bar, we need to think about why that's the bar. In qualitative interviews, we heard players that had felt and experienced negative stereotypes and informal racial barriers, not being invited to the table when it's a conversation about hiring, not being interviewed, being told that certain players just weren't quote unquote likable. And we heard a lot of deep hurt and pain and frustration when we interviewed people. And then I would say, finally, we found a near absence of women as coaches and assistant coaches, not only in MLS, but in NWSL. And that surprised us, to a certain extent. And the absolute absence of Black women and Latinas in executive positions at MLS and NWSL. And we saw that in places like Sky Blue, where there was a woman ownership, you had a very different story when it came to assistant coaches and coaches. So we found, a lot of connections there.
And I want to ask the other three of you, let's start with Crystal. When you read this FAIR report and saw what was in it, what stood out the most to you personally, and how does that coincide with your own observations of the U.S. soccer landscape?
Yeah, I think the underrepresentation of Black women, Black people in general, just in the higher roles, in the administrative leadership roles, executive positions, really starts at the grassroots level. I think it's really getting more people of color in the sport to begin with. And I know there's so many problems that exist in soccer in the US, and it really starts with that pay-to-play model that really limits people of color to really even be exposed and have access to this sport. For me personally, families from Queens, the inner cities, and it took me moving out to Long Island to really be exposed to this sport. You know, till this day, I really don't know if I would have been involved in soccer if my family didn't move me out. So I really just think it starts with getting people involved at an early age and making the sport really easy for people to, you know, just be a kid and have fun and experience this sport. And then working our way up and getting players to stay in the game long enough and want to reach the highest level, obviously, and then go on to have these leadership roles and opportunities.
Justin, when you read the FAIR report, when you saw the information that was in it, what stood out to you, and how did that coincide with your observations of the landscape?
Yeah, a lot of it went along with what I perceived the landscape to be. I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was just the representation of Black head coaches in Major League Soccer, not only now, but over the 25-year history of the league. Like Brenda was saying, the level at which we are setting the bar is very high with some of the best players to ever play the game, like Patrick Vieira, Thierry Henry, but also where a lot of these coaches came from, whether it was Rude, Dennis Hamlet, Robin Fraser. None of these guys were born in the United States, so it just speaks to a bigger problem there of what we value from our American-based, North American-based coaches and how they are having a problem of getting to these higher positions and trying to find out a solution there. So that was what stuck out to me the most.
Yeah, I think the current numbers are in the 25-year history of MLS, 6 Black head coaches, no US-born Black head coaches literally in the history of the league. Evan, when you saw the FAIR report, when you read that, what stood out to you?
You know, I think like Crystal and Justin, it was a confirmation of what my lived experience and what I look at when I go on the web and I look through the different team websites, or when I go to conferences and I see all of the people. It's a homogenous group, and this just reaffirmed that. But the thing that stood out to me the most was the impact, and I want to thank you, good doctor, for putting the work in and publishing this, the impact of this, right? Because again, you know, and I've only really met Crystal and Justin recently, but I'm sure we all have individual stories. I mean, we've been thinking about this for a long time, our entire lives. And, you know, it always is frustrating to me, and I have to maintain my poise and my understanding and my perspective that this is something quote unquote new to other people, right? And people are interested in personal narratives, but then when you get down into discussing this issue, they want to like talk about data, because they say, oh, this is just one thing, or that's just that one experience, or that's just your thing. Now we have a report that was very well done by academics that is a very intellectually honest assessment of what's going on. And to me, that was the biggest takeaway from that, was just the power of objective, not captured individuals putting in work to look at this honestly.
You know, I'm going to bring up some things that are actually literally in the news right now this week, because they're a good way to get into a discussion. And so one piece of news from this week, MLS makes an announcement that they're taking steps to combat racism and increase Black representation. They're forming all these initiatives: an MLS diversity committee, civic engagement initiative, soccer upward mobility initiative, youth and grassroots community initiative, a supplier diversity program, and they're making a $1 million contribution to the Black Players for Change that Justin is part of. What are your thoughts on this news? And I would ask that question, I guess, more to Justin and Evan, and then I want to get Crystal's take on where the NWSL owners are in her opinion on this right now. But for now, Evan and Justin, what are your thoughts on the news?
Yeah, I'll start. So for us, it was a step forward. I think what you saw was a general outline of a pathway, an avenue to get to where we ultimately want to be. I think there's a lot of work left to be done, and I think that's what that press release showed, that Major League Soccer is trying their best to take a step forward in this position, and Black Players for Change have been working with them to do that. But there still needs to be a lot more engagement with the community to define, and specifically the Black community and the soccer community, to define what it is we want and what it is we need and the solutions to those problems, and then have those as objective, measurable targets. And I think that you will see that in the future. So for me, a step forward, but a lot more work to be done.
I mean, I should say here, we've mentioned the names of these organizations that you guys are part of. Crystal's part of the Black Women's Players Collective. Justin's part of Black Players for Change. Evan is part of SCORE, Soccer Collective on Racial Equity. Those are organizations that were formed this year. So they're new, and we're starting to see some things happening in response, it looks like. But Evan, where are you on this MLS announcement this week, and what do you want to see next?
To mimic or reiterate what Justin said, it is an important first step. I feel like Commissioner Garber and his people have a good job doing their listening tour and taking into consideration the thoughts of the different stakeholders. And I know that Justin has done an insane amount of work with BBC and the league, which is, I think that this is the product of that, and we more recently kind of entered that fray. All of these, and again, and I think Justin is right on, measures, assessments, accountabilities. Like, all of these initiatives are good, public announcements, what they actually look like at a granular level, and what kind of measuring they do, and what kind of accountability measures that they allow themselves to be held to, is what's going to really determine whether or not this is a real thing that is going to drive substantive change.
And Crystal, in terms of the NWSL, what's your sense at this point about how the NWSL teams and owners have responded to the organization you just announced, and in their response to these topics?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a very challenging year. Us getting back to playing in the Challenge Cup, the events that took place leading up until that tournament really shocked, obviously, the world, but especially in the NWSL, we wanted to make sure that we were, having conversations and, not just brushing those events under the rug and then cracking on with the Challenge Cup. So I think it really started at that time that we were like, we need to form a group. We need to make sure that our voices are being heard. There's so few of us in the league that we know that, collectively we need to be on the same page and be unified. So right now, unfortunately, we don't have an official relationship with our owners. I think it's very much team by team, groups of players, depending on their relationship with their owners. But we obviously do hope that in the future we can build a universal relationship, because we really are going to need their support. And obviously in the NWSL, we face different challenges than the MLS. The finances are definitely very different on our side. And we know that it's maybe not always going to come down to, owners giving us a lump sum of money, but we know that they are very much connected to their communities, and we need their help in really creating change in the communities. And that's something that we're trying to build with our group, is really making long lasting change, and not just, saying, hey, let's, wear a t-shirt and that's our initiative. It's really about getting in the communities and really getting more Black women involved in this sport. I think that's really our top priority. Obviously, everything is pretty much around this time been geared towards voting and really creating awareness and education at that point. But we think that, our group is so important to be formed so that we can, build better relationships with our commissioner and our owners, but also put in place these initiatives that we know are going to last a really long time. And that's what our focus is.
I've been really impressed with a few young players in the NWSL. Ciara King is actually just amazing, and in some of the stuff that she has said publicly about a lot of topics over the last couple of months. And for anyone who's watching this who hasn't read the FAIR report that Dr. Elsie did with Dr. Jermaine Scott, there's a part in there where you guys interview Ciara King, and she just is awesome, and really good at explaining what she observes, and would like to see changed. There's another thing in the news lately here. There was a report in The Athletic this week. It was by Sam Stejskal and Pablo Maurer about MLS owners. And it showed that while many MLS teams had taken these progressive public stances on Black Lives Matter issues this year, there was a disconnect in that many of the owners of those MLS teams had contributed money to political candidates who have racist and homophobic views. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
I can go first. It's again, I'm quite a critical individual, and maybe some people call me cynical, but I mean, I'm not surprised by that. That's obvious and typical. The social strata where the owners come from and live in, that's kind of like their modus operandi, right? And I think that the article by Sam did a good job about, I think there was one quote in there about somebody who was close to the owner saying that they're single issue voters, right? And how do you amass a great fortune? We have to really care about money, and maybe that is something you care about above all other things. And again, I don't know any of these people, and I don't want to disparage them, but I'm just saying that from the outside. But that article I thought was interesting, in a sense that it makes me. I hope that the readers, when they read that article, understand what's going on. And again, we are happy that Commissioner Garber and the MLS and hopefully the NWSL all start working with us. That's important, and we need their buy-in. However, they are running businesses, and this is a form of social marketing for them. And it's essential for them to social market to their demographic, which is younger, minority, in urban areas, right? It's important to their consumers that they are perceived to be caring about these things. And it's important that us, and that's what Justin and Crystal and I are all doing, is trying to hold them accountable that this is not just a social marketing corporate messaging. It's actually something that they are going to internalize. And they don't have to care about it when they go home to sleep at night, but they have to show it and demonstrate it in their places of business. And I
hope they care about it too, actually.
Yeah, so that's my little rant on that.
Crystal or Justin, have you noticed that disconnect too, where it seems like soccer in America, even more than soccer in other countries, among the fan base is a progressive sport, and then so many of the owners are not so much?
Yeah, I'm with Evan. I'm not really shocked and surprised. I think sometimes unfortunately people get involved in matters that they don't really know how to connect with for social game and just to save face in the public eye. But I do think that again, I'm not super surprised. For us, we would love to have better relationships with our owners. That's what we're working towards. But we also know that if they're not with us and if they don't support us, we will still push our initiatives and still fight for change and unfortunately have to go against them. And of course, we would want them on our side, but we are well aware that not everybody is for us and for our cause and all the changes that we want to make in this world and in this sport. But unfortunate, but that's it.
Justin, what kind of a response have you gotten from fans, especially to what your organization has been doing?
Yeah, so I'll touch a little bit on the previous topic before I move on to that, but they're kind of intertwined anyways. So as Evan and Crystal were saying, we know that the owners have gotten to where they are today, such titans of their industry, because they care about money so much. And they've really taken a notice of what's been going on socially in 2020. How could you not? It's at the forefront of everything. But I think one of the things we saw as players that really piqued their interest, that really got them engaged with us, was when we decided to stand with the rest of the professional sports community on August 26th and decided not to play those games. After that, we got much more engagement than we ever had before. Part of what's come from that is what was in that press release about forming a subcommittee that Board of Governors will be on, different constituents in the Black soccer community will be on. So I know that there is an appetite there for them to listen to us, to work with us towards making a change that we're all talking about. Like Evan was saying, whether that's because they think it's beneficial for their business or they truly believe that it's what should be done. I do think there is a bit of both of that. But at the end of the day, we need to fight and claw and use every opportunity we can to get to this change. And I know that having the Board of Governors and the owners and all of these different leagues bought in is going to be a massive tool for us. So I'm very happy that that product came out of August 26th and all of our work together collectively as a group that's been happening. And I'm hopeful that more fruits of our labors will come out of that. And then as far as the fan engagement, I think you've seen what happened in Dallas with Reggie after the Orlando bubble. And they were really the first team to be playing in front of the national anthem, and the guys take a knee, and there wasn't so much positive response from that. But even on top of that, it was his comments after the match that really got people going. And I think in that moment, we had a lot of discussions with the league about the national anthem and what should happen there. And I think at the end of the day, it provides an opportunity to have a conversation, because I think in that moment, a lot of people out themselves when they speak up like that, and they show their true colors and what they really think. And for us as Black Players for Change, yet using every tool in our arsenal to chip away at this systemic racism that has oppressed us over decades, that conversation is a big part of that. And so as much as we can, up until this day, we've been having conversations with anyone that will talk to us. Part of the reason why I'm here tonight, to continue this message and continue this conversation. And that will continue to be a tool in our arsenal. We will continue to use it moving forward.
Dr. Elsie, have you had, do you have anything to add on the owner discussion?
Yeah, a quick thing. I mean, I would just say the first thing that came to my mind was WNBA and Atlanta. Like this isn't a rare situation to find a sports team in. And one thing I hope that an article like that does for people is to try to tear away that argument that it's the players being political. There's different ways to be political, and taking money that you make off of the labor of the athletes of color and then putting it towards political causes that oppress your workers is a political action. And so I hope that it just, it kind of, sticks with people a little bit that, both these things are political and not just the people advocating for progressive change regarding racism and sexism.
No, that's a good point. Let's stick with you, Dr. Elsie. You made recommendations at the end of your report for the FAIR Network. What were the main recommendations you made?
It's so funny. I wrote it in August, so I had to write it down to remind me with Jermaine, Dr. Scott. A couple of things. I mean, adopting the Rooney Rule 2.0, which has been launched by the NFL. It was a little frustrating to see right after the report, the firing of Chris Armas, and then the list of candidates that came after didn't look like a very different slate. So the Rooney Rule, I think, was pretty on the forefront of our recommendations. Also consulting independent partners and NGOs as part of that evaluation and accountability process, expecting the league to be accountable to itself is part of the issue, right? You often need an outside body to do that work of reporting. And also to provide safety for the players that are coming forward. You talk about Ciara King and how amazing she is. She's a rookie in the Utah organization, which we saw, you saw. And so, to get protection for those players, for those young players or whoever, to not have retribution. Of course, initiatives in youth soccer developed with Latinx and Black communities in mind that intentionally put them in those communities where they're facing transportation obstacles. That was something we heard again and again. So as a way to challenge that pay to play, educational programs for staff as well, front office training, that was pretty high on the list. We also put in there what we heard from the players, which both Justin, well, everyone has said, which is community engagement that is ongoing, that is long-term, and that is not just a photo op. That was another, really, really big recommendation of the report. And I would just like to say, I was really impressed with one thing we didn't put on the report, but maybe should have, was the supplier diversity program that I saw come up, where they were looking at the diversity of the small businesses that were vendors for MLS. And just to say, kudos for pushing that issue.
Are there any other things that you guys would like to add to potential recommendations moving forward?
One thing I'll say, I think all the recommendations are appropriate and good. The first one, which is a cultural shift in the attitudes, is required in the way that Black and Latinx ethnic minorities and women are viewed within the industry. That's that whole hearts and minds thing, and that's essential. And one of the things, so I agree with that recommendation wholeheartedly. And one of the things that I'm a little disappointed about, thus far, with the MLS's response, at least, is in my mind an acknowledgement of the issue and the complicity, whether explicit or tacit, in creating this disparity and this inequity or maintaining it. I think is essential for us, all of us and all of them and everybody watching, to move past this, right? We have to be able to acknowledge that there aren't enough Black people in MLS. There are not enough women in MLS. There are not enough Black women in NFL. There's none, right? There are not enough Latinas in MLS. That needs to be said explicitly. And it seems like a strange point that I always harp on with people, but I think it's so important. And again, it's, MLS, relies on, and I don't want to put the doctor on the spot here, but, there are reports floating around that MLS relies on to talk about how well they're doing in the diversity arena. And there have been reports that give the MLS quite high grades. And since the FAIR report has come out, there has been another more recent report from this institution that continues to give them high grades, which MLS will undoubtedly rely on. And if they continue to rely on that while simultaneously pushing these things, I am going to question the integrity of this response.
There's another piece of news I wanted to ask you guys about, and Dr. Elsey mentioned what happened when Chris Armas was let go by the New York Red Bulls, and how that process appeared to go, replacing him. I had people contact me about when St. Louis MLS's expansion team named Lutz Pfannenstiel as director of football, and they were upset that it didn't appear, it was just like another white guy. And it didn't even come up in the discussion about candidates for that job. One thing we're seeing right now is the head coaching position at DC United is open, and it's been reported that candidates for the job include Jill Ellis, former U.S. women's national team coach, two-time World Cup winner, who could become the first woman to be an MLS head coach, and several Black candidates who could become the first U.S.-born Black head coach in the history of MLS. I find it interesting from a media perspective, and we'll talk about media here a little bit later, that it's pretty clear from these reports that DC United wants the public to know that this is the case, that there is a woman who's a candidate for the head coaching job, and there are Black candidates for the head coaching job, because these sources keep putting this out there. But my question, I guess, for you guys is this promising to you that they are candidates? And would it feel like they're just paying lip service to this if a white man ends up getting the job?
I mean, I feel like you're never gonna know. You know, it's really hard. You want to believe that people are doing the right things because they truly care and they know that they want to right the wrongs, you know. So we're living in a kind of crazy world right now where, you know, people want to be involved in, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, and they want to feel like they are on the right side of history. But then sometimes you have to think like, is this just a photo op? Is it just to save face? Are you doing all the right things in the public eye so that, you know, when you go behind closed doors, you can go back to your normal life and not really care about matters that don't maybe directly affect you? So I think it's really hard to say whether they're doing it for the right reasons, but I do think it's a great first step. You know, I think it's really about people of color getting the opportunity to prove and show that, you know, we belong in these leadership roles. We belong, and we shouldn't have to go through all these crazy hoops to be involved and invited into the door. And I feel like I'm really happy that they're getting these looks. And of course, you just, like I said, you never know.
Justin, where do you stand on this?
Don't worry, Evan. I'll be quick, and then you can go. Back to the report and the findings and the solutions. The one thing that I would say, which applies here, is this idea of changing the culture and perception of Black people in the soccer community, education and implicit bias, because you can open the door to have all of these candidates interviewed, but at the end of the day, if the interview process isn't equitable, if it isn't equal, then they don't have a fair shot from the beginning. And so I think that's what needs to really be addressed, because people just, the thing that I've learned through all of these conversations that I've had with the different stakeholders is that some people just don't understand their own biases, and that doesn't come out until, like Dr. Elsie was saying, someone else addresses that and educates them on that. So very happy that all of these candidates are being assessed. I think that is a product of a couple different things. I think it's a product of this collective group of all the work that we've done to bring it to the forefront. I also know that the DC owners, Levian and Kaplan, are passionate about this and have a predisposition to that. So I feel that maybe that's not the same at a bunch of other clubs where these coaching opportunities are available. So it's kind of an amalgamation of all of those factors. But at the end of the day, to see these names come up is a good step forward. And we want to make sure that at the end of the day, these candidates are able to cross the line. And if that's not on this specific job, we're going to continue to do the work to make sure that all of the processes are right so that these people will have a chance in the future.
You know,
Evan,
you know, I don't know, maybe I'm greedy for equality, but you know, to Crystal's point, like, we'll never know. And, you know, that's not good enough for me, because we can know. And there can be policies and processes created so we will know. And when you think about that article, Stephen Goff wrote, I think, is that who it is? At Washington Post? Goff, thank you, sorry. It's a great article, and, you know, happy to see that. But I know people who were named in that article. And what do you think I did? I texted them and I said, have you been contacted? Are you a candidate? I can find that out. This can be cross-checked. I'm assuming you know Jill Ellis, Crystal. I don't know, maybe you texted her. Has she been contacted? I'm not trying to put you out there right now, but I'm just saying, these are easily ascertainable facts. And that article didn't speak to actually if this is occurring. This is just a random source saying, oh yeah, we're considering this person as a candidate. That is not a substantively real thing. Like MLS, NWSL, NFL, MLB, NHL can create real policies with our help, with Dr. Elsie's help, with Jeremy Duru's help. There are a lot of people in this space who can help create policies that will force this, you know, league rule-driven entity, which is a single entity, right? That can create a policy that everybody has to follow. And it can be quite intricate and demanding. So yeah, I'm not satisfied with the media mentions, because in fact, it's not really substantive.
So what did the guys you texted say?
Well, one of them had not been contacted and is not interested in that. And you know what I'm saying? So again, You know, and so you and I have done this interview before, you know, like, you know
Actually,
how
about
I'm
2
going to
weeks ago we
answer.
did. It's just interesting though, because from a media perspective, you know, we can text people too and verify stuff.
Yeah,
So
and that's my point. Like, what's stopping Stephen from texting whoever his source was and then actually putting it in there, right? Because he's doing everyone a disservice by stopping short.
this is a panel on women as well, and right now there is only one female head coach in the NWSL. There has never been a female head coach or assistant coach in MLS. Other pro sports leagues are ahead of soccer on this. And why do you think that's the case? Crystal?
Yeah, sure, I'll go. Yeah, I think, you know, women, unfortunately, there's this stigma about women in powerful positions, and unfortunately, it's 2020. I don't know why we're still here, but you know, women can coach, and I've played overseas for a female manager, and I thought she was great. She was incredible, and it's just one of those things where it's like I had this amazing experience with this head coach, and then, you know, I go back to the U.S. and I'm just like, goodness gracious, we're still stuck with one head coach that's a female. Um, you know, there's probably so many reasons as to why this is, but I think for the most part, it really is just the opportunity. You know, we're not getting the opportunities to even be interviewed. So again, as Evan touched on, we need to create rules and laws and ways of going about making sure that women are getting these opportunities to be interviewed for jobs, because I really couldn't even tell you what the interview process is. I have no idea if they are even having women on these short lists, and then going out and trying to seek a female coach, whether it's, you know, in the US or overseas. So I think we really do need to look into it. And I'm sure there's plenty of articles and very smart people that can come up with these reports, but I do think it needs to be definitely dived in a bit more, and we really need to put in play a lot more rules and regulations to make sure that we do have these opportunities.
Justin, have you observed anything in MLS to give you an idea of why we haven't seen any women who even have become assistant coaches, much less head coaches in the league at a time when we see them in the NBA, the NFL, and MLB?
Yeah, I would just bring it back to the system and how the system works. Something that Evan and I have been talking about a lot recently. That whether it's Black coaches or women representation at this level, I think the system works against them, because a lot of these opportunities are filled before there's even a proper chance for candidates to be heard. It's a lot of the friend network. You see a lot of people stepping into positions without previous experience because they have relationships with the people who hired them. And so until we address that at all levels, I think you're going to continue to see the subjugation of all of these different constituents and minorities and women, and until we address
that. Your GM at Toronto is Ali Curtis. He's one of a very small number of Black executives in MLS. And Evan, like, is that a similar phenomenon you're seeing happen where it seems like, you know, there's so few Black executives? We're not talking about coaches at this point, but like team presidents, people in those positions of power.
I don't know if I'm going to answer this exactly directly, but if I could go back to the point about women, you know, it made me think about, you know, and Justin just said it's the structure and it's the systems, and that's true. But systems and structures are made up of people and individuals, and it's about the mindset of the individuals that populate those systems. And there's no women in any of those positions because the men in those positions don't think that they can do it, and they don't even think about that. They haven't thought about that. And, you know, I was a undergrad at Duke a long time ago, and the assistant coach for the women's team was Carla Overbeck, who was an insanely amazing defender. And I was a mediocre defender. And I used to talk to Carla Overback about defense. And in the spring, in spring ball, she would come out and play with us, and women from the women's Blue Devils teams, we'd all play together. You know what I mean? Like, you know, are the people in the positions today, do they have that experience? Do they have that mindset? You know, it doesn't seem like they do. There are people out there who do have that mindset. If they were involved in these systems that we're all talking about, you would see that change, because there's no difference between a male coach and a female coach. It's just a person who knows soccer. And, you know, any one of the mediocre current coaches who's winning 30% of their games could be replaced by a woman or a Latino person or a Black woman and win the same amount of games.
I thought you were better than a mediocre defender, Evan. Just so you know, back when I covered you, was 2000 Olympics, right?
Yeah. I mean, no, I got a lot of. There was the differences of opinions, so whatever. I'm at peace with it.
I gotta jump because my coach has scheduled a film for us to start in 5 minutes. We're over in Hartford finishing out the season, so they can change the schedule like that randomly. So I apologize, but I value you guys' information and insight and feedback, and please continue on this wonderful conversation.
Thanks so much, Justin.
All right, thanks, guys.
Take care. I wanted to ask Dr. Elsey, because part of this panel too is about Latinx perspectives. From a Latinx perspective, what concerns have you seen that maybe are more specific to that soccer community in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Latina myself, but, you know, I dedicate my entire career in Latin American history, and we interviewed Latinas, and what we found were a few things. I mean, first, a real frustration with stereotyping and the language barriers. That even though the fan base was so clearly ripe to kind of make an effort to do bilingual outreach at the levels of youth academies and things like that, all the way up to, you know, so from the grassroots up, you saw very little interest in pursuing those communities. Again, as I said, transportation challenges. Also, documentation comes up, and fears about being undocumented and in precarious positions, with which we did not find youth academies to be particularly sensitive to. There are some, like South Bronx United, doing amazing work that could be models for that kind of work for Black and Latinx youth participation, and doing everything from having immigration clinics, you know, on site for parents. And so there's a lot of work that can be done there. In the report, wanted just to go to Evan's point about why the kind of difference between some reports and other reports, and not all reports being maybe equal in terms of the way we grade Latinx participation, is that when we separated out for US born people of Latin American descent, some of those are also Black, right? These are overlapping categories. So we have Afro-Puerto Ricans, we have, you know, so we should acknowledge that both of those categories, they're not, you know, like totally separate categories at all. Many people will experience them both at once. But to say what we found was that there was a lot of representation of foreign-born people from Latin America whose career, you know, whose career was developed without being racialized, without confronting those boundaries. So we took them out of the category of Latinx, not to ignore the xenophobia they might face, but I suppose felt at the end of the report that we wished very much that the Latinx players would have a very similar organization or be incorporated in some of these existing ones.
I want to ask, before I ask this question, actually, for anyone who's watching, if you want to send in questions for a Q&A at the end of this, feel free. A few of those have started to come in. A few years ago, I interviewed the French World Cup winner, Lilian Thuram, at a New York University event about his views on racism and global soccer. which he has basically made his life's work following his playing career. And he said we would really start seeing change when a racist incident happens in soccer, which still happens way too much, obviously, and white players, not black players, would be asked about that incident afterward and take real stands. And I'm wondering, in your guys' opinion, are white people in the soccer community, whether it's players, coaches, administrators, owners, media, doing enough right now?
I think steps are being taken, but I do think, what you just said is so true. I think too often we look at racism as it's a black person's problem. It's a person of color's problem, and it really is everyone's issue. And until we get teammates who are willing to stand up for their black teammates before their black teammates have to face the media by themselves, I feel like we're really not going to move in the direction that we need to move. Too often people are having the argument of if a player is racially abused on the field, why would they walk off? That's disrespectful. That's selfish. And I think if we're still having those arguments today, we are not moving in the direction that we need to move. And I, of course, as a black woman, would hope that if I am racially abused on a soccer pitch, my teammates are the first people to stand up for me before I have to stand up for my own right. So we need to move in that direction. We need to educate people. Unfortunately, we need to keep educating people on the idea that it is everyone's issue and everyone should be involved and be just as outraged as if you were the one being racially abused.
Yeah, that's such an amazing point. I agree wholeheartedly with you, Crystal. I do want to give some credit, and I wish Justin was on the call still. When SCORE sent their letter to MLS, we did get a number of endorsers. And by the way, Crystal is an unofficial official member of SCORE. She was with us in the beginning, and so we're tight knit here. But one of our endorsers, was Major League Soccer Players Association, and that's a big deal. And because SCORE is not BBC, we don't have the platform that they have, so it hasn't been circulated as much. But the fact that Bob Foose, the executive director of the Major League Soccer Players Association, and the all-white executive board, save Luis Robles, voted to endorse all of our diversity and equity initiatives, that is white allyship. I was impressed by that, and we need more of that. The other thing that I would say is, to Crystal's point, like not only, and I haven't been on a team in a long time, but not only do the players need to stand up for that, but the coaches need to stand up for that. And I've heard a lot of coaches talk very passionately about social justice and lethal policing and after games, and including Bob Bradley, Jim Curtin has made some pretty powerful statements. And again, don't take my tone or my direct manner of speaking as to be a negative. I challenge them. They have the power to populate their coaching staffs. They can hire women coaches. They can hire Black coaches. They can hire Latino coaches. And it would be an awesome survey to do to see how many of our prominent American coaches have populated their coaching staffs with non-white people over the last 25 years of MLS. And we know the answer to that because there's only been 6 coaches.
Yeah, I know. I think that's worth looking into.
And before people in the comments
information's
jump on
there.
me, yeah, and there has been a number of assistant coaches, and I think there's been 14 Black assistants, but there's 60 white ones and 30 Latino. I don't know if the numbers exactly, but it's in the report.
I want to ask you one question about the media here, and I'm wondering how frequently do you notice that media members covering soccer in the U.S. are white men like me? And what examples of bias do you see in media coverage, both conscious bias and unconscious bias?
Yeah, I think in the beginning of the year, I really challenged coaches and commentators and people in the media to really change the way they view Black athletes, because I think it is so important how they speak about a Black athlete, and how the difference of opinion on, one Black player doing one thing on the field and their white counterpart doing the same exact thing, but it will be described completely different. Or they'll say that it was all speed and power versus cognitive ability on the pitch. And I think for me, that's happened to me before, where I feel like I'm constantly described as, fast, pacey. And I'm just like, well, that's great. That's what I do need to play this sport. But there's so much about this sport that requires you to be, skillful and just smart. I want to be described as a smart player, not just fast. And I think, words really matter, and the narrative and changing the narrative is something that we really need to move forward with, and quickly. I think a lot of people have voiced this, this change in the media. And if I don't want to go another year where commentators in the media is still doing the same exact thing that they've been doing. So I really do challenge people to just educate themselves and just be better and want to be better, and not just get stuck in your old ways and be lazy in commentating and just, not really care. Because I do think how you describe a Black person is directly related to how they are viewed in society. We're known as just being strong and powerful. And those are the same traits that if a person is walking down the street, they are seen as a threat, so it's a direct correlation to really society and sports. And I think we really need to work hard to change that narrative.
Yeah, Evan, what do you see out there in terms of media and conscious and unconscious bias?
Yeah, I mean, we all know the typical things that people say, right? Strength, power, those types of things. There's some more subtle ones. And again, it's been a long time since I've played soccer, but, people always used to say to me that, like, oh, you're a natural runner, which I always thought was so hilarious, because I used to go to a biomechanics coach to work on my running form, to be a better sprinter. And I went to the gym and worked on my core and did a ton of squats and all those other things. So there wasn't anything natural about that. It cost my parents a lot of money when I was in high school to pay for those coaches. And it took a lot of my time, right? So that's one thing. What Crystal does on a soccer field is not because she was born to play soccer. There isn't a human being on the planet who was born to play soccer. Soccer is a insanely new fiction that human beings created. It has nothing to do with our biological makeup, right? She's worked insanely hard. She's watched a lot of film. She's listened to her coaches. She's thought about the game. She's talked to her peers. I mean, she lives and breathes and eats soccer. That's why she is good at it. And that's why she's better than all of us, because we don't do any of those things.
Stop it, Evan. I've seen you play before. You are selling yourself short.
But I'm being serious. And then the other thing that I always heard, and it rubs me the wrong way, is the honesty. You always hear about Black players not being honest. And that is a very charged thing. I'm not defending honestly, because I'm not touching my forward. But again, an individual who is assessing the scenario that they find themselves in that moment in time, which is fluid, which is always changing. As a defender, I'm thinking about how slow or fast my forward is. Does he like to check to the ball every single time and never run over the top behind the defense? All of those assessments I'm thinking about constantly in microseconds. And when you see me 3 yards off the forward, it's not because I'm lazy or I'm dishonest. It's because this is the decision I've made cognitively in the moment that I think is best. And we think about these things because we live them, and people are like, whoa, you're so crazy and you're so charged up and you're so passionate, like settle down. It's hard to, because it's incessant, right? And if somebody just comes in and throws away some word that discounts everything that you've done for however many years, it's very hurtful.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen this stuff all the time for years and years and years on broadcast and how games are broadcast, not just in the U.S. but around the world. I also noticed it myself. I think I told you, Evan, when we talked for my podcast recently, where we had a group media roundtable interview of Ernie Stewart not long after he was named the GM for the U.S. men's national team. It took place here in New York, which has a pretty diverse, very big media. It's the media capital of the world. And it was 13 people at this roundtable, and it was basically 12 white guys and one white woman. And that was it. And there aren't that many full-time soccer writers in America yet. So I still get that because it's a growing sport. But we got a lot of work to do in terms of just hiring and like I put out on Twitter not that long ago, how many Black women are there covering soccer in the United States?
Danielle Slayton.
Yeah, I was gonna say Danielle. That's all I know. Yeah, it's the representation is so low, and we really have to change it. And like I said, it really starts with really getting people involved in the sport, getting more people of color involved in the sport, because I do think that the way soccer is moving is you want people who are knowledgeable of the game to be in the hiring process, because part of being a good GM is really knowing the game. So that requires a person of color who has played this game and stayed in the game long enough to be able to be in these leadership roles, to understand how to make important decisions to build a team. But if we're not getting enough people of color in the game to begin with, the pool is always going to remain small. For me, I know it's something that I've thought about of what am I going to do after soccer? Like, do I now have this responsibility to stay in the sport, because I know there's so few of us in these executive roles. So you might see me being a GM one day, who knows?
All right.
Yeah. I like it. I like it. I will also send a shout to Jada Evans, a Black woman who covers the Seattle Sounders for the Seattle Times, Maria Felician, who works in Atlanta, and Erica Ayala, who covers soccer and a few other sports. But I literally wanted to get the question answered, and looked into it. There are very, very few Black women covering soccer in the United States. Danielle Slayton's amazing. But just to sort of wrap up here, because we're getting toward the hour mark, we do have a couple of questions I want to throw your way from people who are watching. Here's one. How can we as fans further support you? How do you suggest we help hold teams and organizations accountable for the changes we want to see?
Oh, that is such a great question. I think for fans, especially, just if you see someone being overtly racist, it's your responsibility to hold that person maybe 2 rows from you accountable. And I think it really starts from just being aware. Fans can always educate themselves. We want them to enjoy the game, obviously, but we also want them to know that these are real life issues that players go through, and it's important for them to not just see us as players, but see us as human beings. And I think that's the new phase that we need to move towards, is not just going to experience, your favorite player, but also know the human side of things, and know that when they walk away and they take off their jersey, they are a person of color, and we are viewed differently in society. And, I just want them to know that and see all aspects of our life.
I'll throw this one to Evan. How do you envision your new organizations building coalitions across women's and men's leagues, or is team or league level development the priority?
In the name is collective, all right? So, and it's not like the Black collective or the white collective or anything like that. It's just a collective of people who are interested in soccer and racial equity. So we hope to build that out. Right. In this moment in time, in this particular summer, this was a group of Black men and women that came together. However, through our work with MLSPA, we also had conversations with people in the Latino community in MLS, right? And that hasn't come to fruition. But ideally, that would be a multi-ethnic, multi-gendered, multi-sexual orientation collective of people, right? And I don't know if I addressed the second part of the question. I can't remember exactly what it was.
What was it? Because I was looking at a different one. I think that was mostly, yeah, you got it mostly here.
Can I say something really? Can I say
yeah,
something
I wanted to bring in
quick on fans? I did go to the Independent Supporter Council meeting last year, and we worked with them at Fair on working on the Iron Front flag issue last year, and they are ready and interested to support all of these organizations. And so if you're a fan and you want a node of connectivity and other organized fans who are super progressive, who have major relationships in the community, whether it's like, food banks, anything and you name it, those ISC people are pretty amazing. And right now their president, Bailey Brown, is a woman, and it's a great thing to see. So just my plug.
Got another question here asking, what does diversity among college coaches look like these days? Is it similar to what we see at the professional level? Are you guys keeping an eye on the college game at all?
So,
Evan, can you touch on that? Yeah.
So we have had a number of discussions, and Black soccer coaches advocacy group through United Soccer. They represent a lot of college and youth coaches, and there is definitely a big inequity there. I don't know the numbers. I do know, my alma mater, Duke, John Kerr, the coach there, has been quite intentional and has been reaching out to his former Black players and his current Black players. And we're doing a lot of, Zoom meetings and brainstorming and things like that. So, this moment in time, and, Dr. Elsie, you teach this. I mean, people are energized to do things, and it's exciting to see all of the disparate types of people coming together in community to address these issues. So I don't know the exact answer to that, but I know that there are people who are in NCAA soccer who are banding together.
And Dr. Elsie, I wanted to ask you, like, what is sort of what some research you want to do in the future on this topic after you've done some really good work on this report?
Well, actually, I'm a historian, so I usually look way backwards. This is a little departure for me, but what we've been asked again and again is to take a look at colleges. And that was really interesting. So as Dr. Scott, who I wrote it with, and I have done some of these talks, that question about colleges and universities, also high schools, has come up again and again. And so I think there's a real kind of interest in that. US is so unique. FAIR is a global organization. So the US is like the only place that has this big sector of soccer that's not run by FIFA, right? That's actually, independent. And so we don't have the typical kind of data sets, but we can get them. It would be pretty gigantic, but I don't know, Piara, FAIR's director, if you're listening, maybe that's the next topic out there.
No, there's a really good piece in.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. There's a really good piece in the Atlantic that just came out about they call them alternative sports being like the last bastion for white.
The squash. Is this good? The squash article?
Yeah.
That was amazing.
And it's an amazing article, but Crystal spoke to us in the beginning of our hour. To a large extent, and I think Jermaine is writing about this. No, like to a large extent, soccer is this upper middle class white bastion, a vehicle for sport into college, right?
Yeah, no, totally. That is a really good article, by the way.
We should say too that, generally speaking, with women's sports, Title IX has done an amazing job since 1972 with increasing women's participation. However, you saw the number of full-time coaches as those became real positions in women's sports go down in terms of the number of women. So I don't know the exact data, but I wouldn't be surprised if we looked historically since 72 at actual decreases at certain points as it becomes a job that's enviable and not precarious. It can often be filled by more men.
Well, I think I'll wrap this up. Want to thank everyone for a terrific discussion. Crystal Dunn, Evan Whitfield, Justin Morrow. Thank you, Justin, and Dr. Brenda Elsie. Really appreciate you guys and everyone who's been watching. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.